Welcome to all of you wonderful people joining us on our Ekahau webinar series. It's so good to see so many of you here with us and talking about such a really interesting topic. I know that it's important for a lot of us understanding Wi-Fi security, but not also just learning the great kind of like theoretical side of things. Today, we're going to cover best practices and some real practical insights on how you can keep your environments, your locations as secure as possible. And we're really lucky because we have a fantastic guest joining us who is not only an industry expert, but also one of our fantastic ECSE instructors as well. So I'm going to pass over to Troy to do a quick round of introductions.
Thanks, Matt. As always, we have Stu Gumans on the call, our Global Director of Community and Customer Engagement, right? Very familiar to all of you. We have Dale Tyler from our SE team on the call as well, and you saw doing the introductions. You have myself, Troy Martin, and as always, the ever-present and lovely-looking Matt Starling wearing the beautiful 802.11 shirt. And brings us to our special guest, Phil Morgan, that we're happy to have on the call today, representing NC-Expert with an extensive background on Wi-Fi security, able to discuss best practices, both on the Wi-Fi side of things, as well as the physical security side of things. So we're looking very much forward to the discussion with Phil today. So again, thank you for being here today, Phil.
Hey, my pleasure.
Right. Now, just put a little context and some frames of reference into our discussion today. Here's a little outline of the history of Wi-Fi. Wi-Fi is a protocol that actually began last century, right? So a century-old technology, beginning with the first standard being published in 1997, supporting web encryption, which Phil's going to break down for us and talk about the pros and cons of web. But that was the early days that Wi-Fi realized that we needed to protect communication across a wireless link. As Wi-Fi quickly evolved from those 1 and 2 megabit speeds, we released amendments, the 11A and the 11B amendments, both in 1999. The 11B amendment adding increased speeds, taking us all the way up to blazing fast speeds of 11 megabits per second, and the 11A standard pivoting to support 5 gigahertz based transmissions. Right. 11A also introduced something called OFDM, the orthogonal frequency division multiplexing, breaking down signals into a bunch of subcarriers within that 20 megahertz block. OFDM was so powerful and so resilient for a wireless communication technology that in 2003, OFDM was ported down to the 2.4 band, with 11G now supporting OFDM. And OFDM brought Wi-Fi speeds and data rates up to 54 megabits per second. And in that time, WEP was cracked. There were some vulnerabilities that were discovered with WEP, and the IEEE got to work with the 802.11i standard. But it took some time for WPA2 and 11i to be rolled out. We had to go through a hardware refresh. So around the 2008, 2009 timeframe, we should have migrated into WPA2 land, which is also around the same time that 802.11n was introduced into the Wi-Fi world. I would argue this is the TSN turning point in Wi-Fi, where Wi-Fi finally became fast enough and stable enough to become a dominant access technology. 802.11n introduced MIMO technologies, channel bonding, multiple spatial streams, a whole bunch of really great enhancements for Wi-Fi. We extended and built upon that in 2013, adding the amendments for 11AC, which only supported 5 gigahertz based improvements. Right, but Wi-Fi didn't stop there. In 2019, 11AX was introduced, right, adding a whole bunch of improvements. And as part of 11AX, it extended into the 6 gigahertz range, right? Opening up in a lot of regions up to 1200 megahertz of additional spectrum that we could use for Wi-Fi technologies, right? So a lot of great improvements and eventually ending up where we are now today with the standard Wi-Fi 7, 11BE being introduced and rolled out into the market as an official standard that's available now from the IEEE. And in about 5 months, it'll be freely available for anyone to download from the IEEE website. Now we're going to jump into a little poll question here, right, for a little bit of participation, right? If you just want to answer back what security technologies are using in your networks today, whether it's WEP going back to last century's technology, if you're in some of those transitory type states or you're leveraging WPA. Do you still have some client devices on your network that need to use WPA2 technologies, or have you committed and gone all in with the latest and greatest WPA3 technologies? So just let us know your thoughts, where you're at with your networks. Phil, where do you think everyone should be today if they were deploying a new network in terms of security?
Oh, I think everybody should be at WPA3. But of course, Troy, we have to take into account that the customers may have devices that, sure, they want to upgrade them, but they're not ready to upgrade yet. And so we should be as further down that list, I believe, as possible. So if not WPA3, then at least WPA2. And look at that. Do we have one person still using web and 3 people using WPA? That makes me so happy. If they could provide their name and addresses to us, then maybe hackers can go and hack them. I'm being mean and facetious. No. So, and if you talk to these people, they'll say, I want to run WPA3, but management, we still have, and the usual case is barcode scanners in the warehouse, right? We have older barcode scanners that work perfectly well. Why do we want to spend, thousands of dollars upgrading them? And so I think the time is right to upgrade, and I am very, very happy with the number of people running WPA3. That's a lot of people. And so I think this is a great poll, Troy.
All right, wonderful. Thanks everyone for your submissions. Now, why don't we break down some of these technologies into more detail?
So the basic connectivity mode that we used for the longest time, I can still remember going somewhere to visit and someone saying to me, hey, we need to connect the Wi-Fi, and we looked around and we found the nearest open network and connected to that. Not illegal, technically, but those were the old days. Now, you don't want that. You don't want anybody just connecting to your network. So if you have an open network, which of course is the foundation of coffee shops, bars, restaurants, that's okay, but it needs to have some kind of protection on the back end. So usually we use a captive portal, and this is usually the point where most people are, say, captive portal and then spit. Or maybe something like open roaming or something, or some kind of protection and not leave it totally open. Back in the day, we had WEP, and WEP was great for what it was invented for. But as time went by, weaknesses became known, and it became obvious that WEP was no longer adequate to protect the information it was meant to protect. And so around about 2003, 2004-ish, the Wi-Fi Alliance worked on an alternative to strengthen WEP. And so WPA, TKIP, and it was still based on RC4. It was kind of like WEP version 2. It was a better version of WEP, but it was always designed to operate until something better came out. And the IEEE 802.11i group was working on something better. And then eventually in around about 2004, WPA2 came out. Completely different, CCNP, AES. I dare use the word unbreakable. What I mean is very, very difficult to break. Nothing is unbreakable if you throw enough ProSim power at it. But WPA2 was leaps and bounds ahead of WEP and WPA, and it's still in use today, as we just saw. Okay, nothing much really happened then until WPA2 also started showing weaknesses, and again, it's because of the power of the compute processing that we have. It's great for processing. It's also really good for breaking security, right? So as our processing power becomes more powerful, it shows weaknesses in the protocols. And to be fair, WPA2, no one ever broke AES. What they broke was the process that WPA2 used. And so WPA3 came out, and along with WPA3 came enhanced open, where if you have an open network, you still have encryption, which is really incredibly magical. And so WPA3 really is the one you should be using today. It's introduced advanced features like GCMP, larger, bigger than 128-bit. You can now have 192-bit encryption. And of course, WPA3 and enhanced open are mandatory in 6 gigahertz, and support for them is mandatory in AX and BE, what we also know as Wi-Fi 6 and 7.
Hey Phil, someone's put a question in the Q&A. I feel like maybe we can just answer this one quickly. And it says, why does WPA3 take many years to be available?
So that's the function of the process. Someone comes up with an idea, they create a tool, which is a proposal to do the idea. Then the IEEE has to formally assign a task group. They work on it, and these people spend volunteer hours, many, many hours working on the pros and cons. And so it took a long time for WPA3 to become finished. And when it was officially finished, actually, I talked about the IEEE. WPA3 was a Wi-Fi Alliance certification, similar process, quite often the same people, actually. I recognize some people asking questions now from various groups I'm in. We all have the same goal. We want to make the world a better, safer place. Of course, as soon as WPA3 was released, then vendors and clients had to bring the code into their products. And as always, everybody wants to rush to get the first code out the door. Notice I didn't say everybody wants to rush to get working code out the door. So for a little while, WPA3 was a little flaky. We had a few problems, but now today it's quite stable. And I would say it should be the mainstay of our security backbone. We have the tools available to make our lives more secure, but of course, backwards compatibility and all those devices, and management wants to do it, but they haven't got budget for it till next quarter. That's usually the major delay. And because if there's one group of devices that don't support WPA3, then you can't migrate over to WPA3. And in a little while, we'll talk about what you do. And if anybody's ever heard me speak ever before, transition mode is not the answer. Friends don't let friends run transition mode. That is my personal opinion, and I can bore you for hours with why. But I will. That's later, right?
Yeah, there's been a lot of questions in the chat and the Q&A asking around like best practices when it comes to like SSID configuration and an approach like that. And guys, girls, don't worry, we're going to be covering all of that later on in the webinar today. So stay tuned. We've got some examples of SSID configuration, some best practices that you can take away from the slides. And Phil, like coming back to to WPA3, like WPA3 has been around for a little while now, right? It's not necessarily that WPA3 took such a long time. It takes more of a longer time for adoption on the client devices.
Yes. So just imagine that take a look at Tesla, right? When was Tesla launched? And when does Tesla become a popular car, popular vehicle? It takes time for people to buy the equipment. So most companies have like a 3 or 4 year refresh cycle. So yes, we need to go WPA3, but we're not refreshing our laptops, our mobile devices. Phil, you're not down for a new laptop and a new mobile device for 2 years yet. So I'm not going to start using WPA3 in 2 years, and we're not going to drop everything and buy everything brand new. So there is a cycle of when a product is released, when a concept is released, when it becomes usable, and then when you go, isn't there a kind of bell curve of there's the early adopters, the incredibly optimistic, they call them. Then there's like the real world users where it becomes normal and everybody. And then there's people look down on you saying, what, you don't use WPA3? And we are really now coming into the phase of WPA3 is the way to do things. It's mandatory in 6 gigahertz. It's mandatory in AX. It's mandatory in Wi-Fi 7 BE. Now, I said it's mandatory. That means you have to support it. It doesn't mean you have to turn it on, man. That's another problem, right?
Yep. But you are talking about managed frame protection, and there has been quite a few questions about that in the chat. So I feel like this is a good segue into answering that now.
So management frame protection is mandatory with WPA3. It's also mandatory with AX. It's also mandatory with 6 gigahertz. But as I said, it's mandatory to support it. It has to be on in 6 gigahertz, but in 5 gigahertz, you can choose to run transition mode, which means clients that support it can use it, but it doesn't need to be activated. And the main thing about management frame protection is it's the old classic story of, hey, my name's Matt, the webinar is over, you can all go now. You're all looking saying, no way, Phil, you're nowhere near as good looking as Matt. And you're not Matt, because we understand, right? We can see Matt. But that's what spoofing of APs and MAC addresses can do. It's very, very easy to pretend to be an AP and tell all the clients on that AP to disconnect. Nobody leave that was an example. I'm just kidding. But management frame protection stops that in its tracks. So you're all sat there going, hey, Phil, you don't look like Matt. You don't sound like Matt. That's what management frame protection is. I don't think you really are my AP. So I'm actually going to ignore your instruction to disconnect. And it can be used against management frames and other advanced frames as well. Can we do the next slide, please, Troy? So yeah, so action frames, disassociation, deauthentication. The disconnection ones are the main ones it stops you from. But there's also robust action frames, because not only can you say to disconnect, but you can start feeding information into the AP that's not true and accurate. And the AP will, of course, believe it. But if you're using management frame protection, the AP and the client will only talk to each other if you are using part of the encryption keys you get during the four-way handshake. They are used to protect the exchange of management frames.
So we're about to jump into a demo here to show you how you can see which networks, Wi-Fi networks, have management frame protection turned on. But just while I transition here, it sounds like it's a very useful feature to help protect your network and keep devices from flooding your clients or your access points with deauth frames. But with traditional WIPS type systems, where you realized or you're able to detect that there was a rogue access point out there, we used to be able to deauthenticate clients connecting to those rogue access points. And it sounds like this may break that. So I was just wondering, Phil, do you have any guidance or suggestions or what we can do about maybe the loss of this ability from what we used to have in traditional WIP systems?
So it was always discouraged to go and attack any SSIDs because people have gotten in trouble. So whenever we talk about doing attacks, and there's many courses and things that I've developed and I helped develop and presented, and it's always the same. It comes with a warning saying there may be legal repercussions. But if you have my network as an enterprise and somebody is blatantly trying to spoof my network, I don't know. Obviously, you need to take legal advice on this, but I would be very doubtful if a judge is going to slam you with a fine when you're saying that they were trying to break into my network and steal data from my customers. Again, you've got to check with your legal department in the region that you're in. But while it used to be an option to defend yourself, now hackers and attackers can use that against us now, Troy. So you're right. Now that we can no longer deauthenticate and disconnect and disassociate, that means that the attackers are also immune from those defenses as well. So yes, but I think that's a price we have to pay to have more security in our networks. The enemy will use your weapons against you. As I think Sun Tzu said that. Make sure the enemy doesn't get hold of your weapons or they will use them against you. And that is the reality. But I think when you balance it, I would rather have these weapons removed from everybody and then they can't attack our networks, even though it means we can't defend ourselves so well, Troy.
Brilliant. Thanks, Phil. So what you see now on the screen is the initial interface to the Ekahau Analyzer app that runs on iOS or on Android. And we see a summary of the performance metrics across your wireless network. And this tool allows you to do some spot check troubleshooting to validate why you may be having performance issues in your CEO's office or a particular area of the warehouse floor, right, or in a mine or some other place. The check boxes on the left-hand side, those green check boxes and the red or circles, the red X's that are there, it's because you're evaluating those metrics against your RF coverage profiles. So if any of those metrics fail against your RF coverage profiles, that's why they transition from green or red that you can see. So I can quickly look at the coverage that I see from my access point or detect other access points that may be around me. Potentially, those could be rogue access points, which we'll discuss later on in today's webinar. Right? I can see the channel utilization. So how much activity is going on the wireless network around me, and I can break that down by looking at different bands. So the 5 gigahertz band, I can see if there's any 6 gigahertz activity in or around me, right? So right now, there's not a lot of 6 gigahertz activity in my particular environment. A great incentive to move into the 6 gigahertz space because I have lots of access to free untouched spectrum. But if you look at the 2.4 space, right, what you typically find a lot of utilization across the entire band on 2.4 gigahertz. If you were having some issues, this may be an incentivization to transition to a channel that had a lot less utilization or a lot less activity, which would free up some capacity across your network. You also have the ability to look at the raw RF spectrum, looking for interfering devices that are non-Wi-Fi transmitters. They could show up on your spectrum. Again, 6 gigahertz in this particular environment, quite clean, very attractive to move to the 6 gigahertz band because, again, I'm not competing with other transmitters, other devices in my environment. And then what we often see with the 2.4 band, heavily used, heavily saturated with both Wi-Fi and non-Wi-Fi technologies. Okay. We can also look at any interfering devices that happen to be fingerprinted or detected by the Sidekick 2. Right, I have some typical some BLE or Bluetooth devices in my environment, which could be coming from my Apple Pencils, the watch that I'm wearing that's Bluetooth enabled. I have Bluetooth BLE enabled earbuds in, so a lot of BLE and Bluetooth devices naturally in your various environments. But we can check out other bands. If there were radar pulses, as an example, from those TDWR transmitters, those would be fingerprinted and you would see what channels you were getting regular radar pulse hits on the 5 gigahertz band. And typically these days, we don't see a lot of interference on the 6 gigahertz band. But I will call out just one thing that comes up as a little bit of a surprise. We are seeing LED lights that if you happen to mount your access points, within a meter or two of an LED light, it may work fine on day 0, but on day 90, when RRM kicks in and that access point changes its channel to channel 149, it may now interfere with those LED lights. And if you're within that 2-meter window of being close to that LED lights, not all LED lights, just some of them will emit some narrow band interference on channel 149. So just one around in the upper part, on 5 gigahertz, they'll emit those interfering signals across to interfere with your Wi-Fi channels. Last thing I want to show you is just the network overview. So this is a Wi-Fi scanning feature built into the network analyzer or into the Ekahau Analyzer app, and we can see a list of all the wireless networks that are in or around me. I can filter across the top looking at specific bands, the 2.4, 5, and 6 gigahertz, or I can look at all the bands all together. There are a limited number of columns that we can display all at once, but if you want to change the columns and the information that's being displayed, you can click on the 3 dots in the upper right-hand corner, and you can swap out those columns, right, to present information that's more useful for you, depending on what you're trying to diagnose or troubleshoot at that particular moment. So you do have that customization ability. And if I zoom in to a particular network right here by clicking on that little information bubble, I have a radio that's advertising 3 SSIDs. Things Secure has been configured according to Phil's best practices for modern Wi-Fi security. I have WPA3 enabled on that SSID. And because WPA3 is enabled, I have management frame protection turned on. And so I can see on the right-hand side in that second column from the right that I have management frame protection in an enabled state, right? So all clients connecting to this particular SSID will be required to support management frame protection and will be leveraging this feature while connected to that SSID. All right, so that's a little demo of some of the diagnostic information that you can quickly find through the Ekahau Analyzer app, just to confirm how that access point is configured. And maybe because it supports management frame protection and it's configured to be required, maybe that's why some of your clients are not able to connect to your network, because the clients themselves do not support that feature or have it disabled as part of their supplicants, or part of their client configuration. Right, so here's just a quick summary again of the different columns that you can filter out through the Ekahau Analyzer app, right? Just as a quick reminder for that. And here's just a little red bubble highlighting that management frame protection field that you can see as you drill down through the network overview to discover the capabilities that have been configured to be advertised for your SSID across your access point radios.
So this is a great point that you raised there, Troy. The Ekahau tool is a great tool to just power on, run it up, and see what's going on in your environment. I do a lot of troubleshooting for customers. It's one of the first tools I use. I want to see what's going on, and I want to see what they're doing, because sometimes what the customer says they're doing isn't what they're doing. Yeah, we have manufacturing, so we have MFP turned on. No, you don't. We do, and they go check, and of course they don't, because maybe a techie turned it off because there was a problem or for testing or something. And so it's a great evaluation tool to see what's going on. Then, of course, I will go and do a site survey to find out more about the troubleshooting as well. But anyway, getting back to security, legacy Wi-Fi security is just not good enough, guys. What is the point of locking your door to keep my stuff safe? Well, what if I can show you that the lock, if I push the door opens? You'd be horrified. It's exactly the same with legacy Wi-Fi security. It's just not good enough anymore. In fact, if you use TKIP, back when N came out, they would limit to 54 megabits only, to standard speeds. You couldn't use the N speeds if you didn't go to the new WPA2 protocols. Why do we still use legacy Wi-Fi security? Because we haven't upgraded yet. And I'm going to be blunt, because we haven't upgraded yet. Why? Well, you may have reasons inside your company why you haven't upgraded, but you know you kind of should, right? Yeah. So you know when your teenager comes to you and says, "Dad, please can I borrow the car?" And you're like, "No, I have to pick your mom up from the airport." And you love them to borrow the car, but you just can't. That's where we have to go with security, because a little game I play called "What's the worst thing that could possibly happen?" What's the worst thing that could possibly happen is you could end up on the nightly news cycle because your company has been breached because you didn't have the right security. Now, if you're a manufacturing company, that's going to hurt. If you're a bank, you're going to lose customers. So it depends on who you are and what security. Sometimes you need to upgrade to WPA3 just because you have to. And I understand people drag their feet, but I want to kind of go out and evangelize, WPA3, when do we need it? Now. Yeah, really, really encourage you all to move to the latest security features. Somebody says, "Phil, what about people who are afraid to do it?" So I did it at home, converted to WPA3. Two of my kids, adult kids, older kids, came and said, "Our iPads don't work." Okay, I turned off WPA3 and it started working, so I knew that was the problem. "Can you update, please, guys?" They updated their tablets, iPads. It turns out they hadn't updated for like 2 years, which is a different conversation we have to have. But it was a software upgrade to support WPA3. They didn't have to buy new iPads. It was simply a software upgrade to go from supporting WPA2 to the ability to support WPA3. And quite often WPA3 is a software upgrade. You haven't always got to buy new products. Now, if you've got web devices, you have to buy new products for WPA2, right? And so I encourage you to upgrade your client devices. And if you think about it, if you're running web stuff, like the iPhone came out in 2006, I think. And so you were using a product that's older than the iPhone 1, which you may be a little bit embarrassed about. But it works in the warehouse, Phil. I understand that. If you have to do that, create a separate SSID for those in the warehouse and only allow them to connect to it. Put like double firewalls over the top of it and protect it that way. But for everything you can upgrade, upgrade as soon as possible. Next slide, please, Troy. So I've seen a lot of questions alluding to this. And Kadeem has actually said, Phil, what's your take on WPA3 transition mode? So the problem I've got with WPA3 transition mode is it's not WPA3, right? Your management say, we run WPA3. And I'm like, no, you don't. You run WPA3 transition mode. What does that mean? That means you're not running WPA3. That means a device can come in and say, oh, I can't use WPA3. Sorry, can we go back to WPA2? Yeah, with all the problems that had. So I believe you should always have separate SSIDs. Don't run transition mode. And this is a hill that I will stand on and defend. Okay, and I firmly believe this. Other people, smarter people than me that create standards have come out and says, friends don't let friends run transition mode. The biggest problem with transition mode is you are still using the old protocols that you want to get rid of. So new devices will use the new ones. Old devices will use the old ones. Just a heads up to you, if you connect to WPA3 in the office, and I know what your pre-shared key is, I can set myself up as WPA2, and you will probably connect to me. There are tools available where you can say WPA3 only, and a client will reject and say, alarm, alarm. This is a WPA2 network. Last time we connected, it was WPA3. That's good stuff, okay? But some devices just don't do that. They just connect. Now, you think you're WPA3 connected to your office SSID, but you're not. You're connected to Phil the hacker, Hoodie Phil. And I can now capture your data, break into your network, and steal stuff from you. So transition mode advertises both, okay? There's a new mode they brought out called compatibility mode as well, because of course there were problems with some clients who didn't like, hey, we can't do WPA2 and WPA3, and they balked and wouldn't connect. So compatibility mode hides that in another element further down in the beacons, for example. And so compatibility mode is an alternative, but again, of course, the clients have to use it. And I will just simply say outright, my advice is don't use transition mode. Next slide, please, Troy.
So just sorry, just wanted to just quick question kind of on this. Someone asked in the Q&A about with PMF or MFP, there is an option when you're configuring this to set PMF to be optional. Now,
Yeah.
how does that work? Let's say you've got a WPA2 network and then you set the PMF option to be optional. Does that kind of correlate or relate similarly to with transition mode? Or maybe you can just give a little bit of a deep dive on that.
Absolutely. So that's PMF transition mode.
Hmm.
So you have PMF and MFP are used interchangeably in the industry, and so the standard does use both. So it's MFP capable and MFP required. If you say my network is MFP capable, then any clients that support it will use it or can use it. If you say MFP required, that means that anyone that connects that network must support MFP. Okay, and that's the big difference. And so MFP capable is protected management frame transition mode, which again, Phil doesn't like transition mode. I don't believe you should do that because you're letting people choose or you're letting devices choose if they want to do it, and you should have it mandatory. And MFP is very powerful. In fact, a lot of people don't know this. The difference between WPA2 enterprise and WPA3 Enterprise is protected management frames. That's it. WPA2 Enterprise, WPA3 Enterprise has one difference. PMF is on WPA3 Enterprise. So you will see devices identify a network as WPA2 with PMF on when you've configured WPA3, and you will see devices identify networks as WPA3 Enterprise if you configure WPA2 with PMF. And so all the WPA3, the main focus WPA3 is in the personal side. Enterprise side is turn on PMF and you're good.
Thank you.
Pleasure. So what I recommend you do, best practices, have the same SSID for 5 and 6 gigahertz, and we've been taught this for the longest time. Have a different SSID for 2.4 gigahertz, right? If you have to have, but Phil, I've got devices that only support WPA2, or they don't support protected management frames. Okay, then create an SSID, a third SSID called legacy. You don't need to put that on 6 gigahertz because it's not going to work anyway. So have MyNet and MyNet_legacy. And that's an easy way because everybody that connects to MyNet_legacy, you can see all the devices you have to upgrade. Very easy, very simple. And then, of course, you can use extra protections on the back end to protect the WPA2 networks. Okay? We recommend you use 802.11k and V. Be careful with V. Client implementation, vendor implementation can have a few gotchas. So don't just go and turn it on now. Please go and test it and make sure it's compatible with your environment. And the problem is if you're not using big expensive clients, iPhone, Samsung, Intel, if you're not using those devices, there may be compatibility. So like other Androids may or may not work depending on the chipset and the drivers. I would strongly recommend you use 802.11r for 802.1x authentication. You kind of don't need fast roaming if you're using WPA2 personal pre-shared key. It's kind of not needed, but it is needed for WPA3 personal. Okay, it does help you there. And again, load balancing is a standard practice. Load balancing is, again, something that may cause delay when clients roam. So you've got to work with your vendors' best practices. And this is the point where someone says, what about band select or band steering? Well, we don't need band steering, right? Because we don't have the same SSID on 5 and 6 and 2.4 gigahertz. So
Yeah,
band
Phil,
steering is not needed.
There's a great question that came in the Q&A, which I think we should answer probably now. Is how can you create specific SSIDs for WPA2 when we are limited to having a lower number of SSIDs?
And that is a problem. There are some devices that, some vendors that limit the number of SSIDs you can have. And there's always a limit, but some vendors have bigger limits than others. If you have a limit and you've got, for example, your SSID, you've got your guest SSID, excuse me. Well, first of all, the SSID you create on 2.4 gigahertz with one vendor in particular, and the SSID you create on 5 and 6 gigahertz don't count as the same SSID. That counts as one SSID. Okay, it's only if you try and do it on 2.4 and 5 and 6 does it count as a second SSID. Okay, so there are ways around it, but I hate to say this, Matt, after preaching and evangelizing WPA3 and no transition mode, sometimes you've got to do what you got to do, right? And so whenever a wireless engineer says never do that, they mean never do it unless you want to. So if you have a limitation of the number of SSIDs you have, at least transition mode is going to be better for some of your clients. The big problem I have with this is it gives you a false sense of protection. You're not running WPA3, you're still running WPA2. So we can still attack you with the WPA2 things. That's my real bugbear with transition mode. Transition mode is a lovely tool to help you transition, but it should be used for 10 minutes while you transition, right? It shouldn't be used for 5 years. And that's my big bugbear with transition mode. I would rather you don't use transition mode and you clearly know what security is on what SSID, and then everybody's happy. The false sense of protection and security we get from using transition mode is what my real hatred of transition mode is, if that makes sense.
And the idea of having multiple SSIDs on a given radio, it does add to your airtime utilization, but we can mitigate that quite effectively by disabling the lower data rates. So if you pick a data rate as 12, or maybe you need to jump up to 24 as your minimum basic rate, that mitigates a lot of the impact of adding that second SSID dedicated to WPA2. If you were to leave those lower data rates, especially on the 2.4 gigahertz side of things, the 1 and 2 megabits per second, if you left those on, then there's a much higher impact of adding additional SSIDs. But we can mitigate a lot of that, and the trade-off is a more robust, more secure network. And I think it's worth the additional airtime overhead of having a dedicated WPA2 SSID and a dedicated WPA3 SSID by compensating for the minimum basic rates.
And we also have multi-MB-SSID now, Troy, where multiple beacon information can be put in a single beacon. But of course, you've got to have client compatibility with that, which brings us back to transition mode again. Yeah. Next slide, please. So use a modern Wi-Fi security, okay? As we mentioned, be careful and plan if you are going to use transition mode. Just be aware that it still has all the weaknesses of WPA2. So as we mentioned, have separate SSIDs for WPA3 and WPA2. Use MFP as much as possible. Never, and when I said never until you want to, yeah, this is an exception to that. Never use WEP or WPA anymore. They are very, very insecure. Watch out for rogue APs. A rogue AP, is it a genuine threat, okay? There's an SSID, we don't know who it is. It's the coffee shop downstairs, man. Oh, okay. If you're on a military base and you suddenly see a coffee shop advertised, hang on a second, we don't have a coffee shop. So be aware of your environment, okay? A rogue AP generically is any AP that you don't know about. It's not part of your network. Is it a real rogue AP? Is it connected to your network? If there's a rogue AP running and it's not connected to your network, is it really a threat? Another interpretation of a rogue AP is an AP that is advertising your SSID, but it's not a part of your network. That is an immediate red flag that needs to be resolved. Another aspect of APs is physically protecting them. Key and material may be stored on some vendors' APs. And so I've known of situations where people have stolen the AP to get keying information to help them attack. Next slide, please, Troy. So, is your AP exposed? Is it protected? Is it safe? Do you put a cage around the AP? Yeah, as long as it's not metal, right? Because then you just built a Faraday cage around the AP. So some kind of NEMA enclosure. And by the way, when you put this on the AP, it's the antennas that need to be exposed to the environment. So the AP can be somewhere else, and you can have a cable run into an antenna that's in the dangerous environment or the exposed environment. Next slide, please, Troy. Now, of course, we have to mention the advanced features in roaming and MLO, for example, with Wi-Fi 7, require that all frequencies have the same SSID with the same configuration. And so this is an immediate problem we have with the screeching halt with have different SSIDs. But I have a personal opinion here, and it's very, very personal opinion. Is 2.4 gigahertz really that useful? Yeah, thankfully 2.4 gigahertz came to my rescue, said no one ever, right? Do you really want to share 6 gigahertz and 2.4 gigahertz? Isn't it better to share 5 and 6 gigahertz in an MLO environment? Now, we are now limited by client functionality here. So just be aware, if you do take the advice of having different SSIDs on 2.4 gigahertz and the other frequencies, you will stop MLO in its track from using 2.4 gigahertz. But again, from a personal perspective, I'm not entirely convinced that's a horrible thing, right? Because you saw earlier when Troy showed his 2.4 gigahertz, 2.4 is usually very congested, very, very unpleasant. On the next slide, please, Troy.
Okay. What we're going to show you here is just a little demo of the packet capturing capabilities that are available within the Ekahau Analyzer app. So I'm just going to transition to my iPad again here. Right. So again, we're within the Ekahau Analyzer app, and I didn't show you all the features earlier, but a couple things that I just want to show you guys now. Just very quickly, if you weren't aware, there is a speed test integration within the Ekahau Analyzer app where I can quickly do a spot check speed test to evaluate the throughput and performance on your wireless network. You get the visibility into what's happening in the RF spectrum while you're running that speed test. Identification of what SSID, what band, what channel width you're connected to. And while you're running that speed test, not only do you get to see a graph that displays your speed and throughput over time, but it also shows you what the utilization across the wireless spectrum is. Right, which gives you some insight is, are you using the wireless medium to the most of its capabilities, or is your bottleneck somewhere deeper in the network, right? Maybe your bottleneck is with the ISP connection, right? So you get some insight, some information related to that. So we do have integration with speed tests now available in the Ekahau Analyzer app. But jumping back to the packet captures, one of the first things that I like to do is just quickly jump into the network overview tab. And I do this so that I can get a list of what channels that may be of interest for me to perform my packet capture on. But with the Sidekick, it has 4 Wi-Fi NICs built into the Sidekick, which allows me to capture on 4 channels simultaneously. This is super useful when you're troubleshooting voice roaming issues and you want to capture traffic on the AP or the radio you're currently connected to, and then the radios that you may be roaming to. If you don't know for sure which access point you'll roam to, you may want to do a packet capture on a few of the nearby clients, right? So I'll get a list here to see what channels may be of interest to me. Then I can jump back to this screen here and click on packet capture. In this interface here, I can start a new packet capture just by clicking on new. This is where I can select what I recommend up to 4 channels. You do have the ability to capture on more than 4 channels, but bear in mind when you do this, because there's only 4 Wi-Fi NICs in the Sidekick, the Wi-Fi NICs will be time slicing. So they'll be hopping across channels, which may cause you to miss some of the frames that are being transmitted on a given channel. You may want to do this just to get a sampling of some of the activity that's going across many, many channels. But if you wanted to capture all of the frames, limit your packet captures to just 4 channels, right? So I can select channels. I can also mix bands, right? So I can select activity across multiple channels. And when I've selected my 4 channels of interest, I simply click on capture. It initializes the Sidekick, flips them to packet capturing mode. I get this screen here. One of the things that I like to look at is that my file size is increasing. This gives me the warm fuzzy that I'm actually capturing traffic on my channels of interest, right? Just a little feedback. This is also when I'd recreate my issue. If I had a client that had issues connecting to the wireless network, now is when I'd try get them to connect to the network, capture the frames that are being exchanged while they're not able to connect, or I'd recreate my roaming issue that I was trying to solve while I'm performing the packet capture. Once that client times out, or once the roaming event eventually fails, I click on stop capture, right? The PCAP is immediately transferred from my Sidekick to my mobile device, right? So that PCAP file now lives on my mobile device, and now I can share it from my mobile device. In this case, it's my iPad. I click on share. I have many, many options that I can use to share. I could text it to someone, although I'm not convinced that's the best technique to use. But I could transfer it via Google Drive, via Dropbox, OneDrive, or I could use iCloud built into Apple. So I'll just use that, save to files. Here, what I like to do is I just like to change the file name, right? Just so I can keep track of what it is on my iCloud drive. You'll notice in the file name, it also includes the channels that I had selected. So as part of the file name, I can use that as a reference to see which channels I selected on. I just click on save. And now in the background, it's syncing this to my iCloud drive, right? Which I'll be able to review that file in Wireshark on my laptop and do a detailed analysis and diagnosis of all the frames that I've captured during this packet capture.
I just want to jump in and say I actually like to use AirDrop. It just takes seconds to AirDrop it over. And I use this all the time. I was using this a couple of days ago. Just watch it. Keep an eye on that file size though, Troy, right? I did some testing with like a Netflix video, and my file was like 2.6 gigabytes by the time I copied it over. My fault. But I got what I needed.
Yeah, absolutely. Definitely want to keep in mind the file size. Also, the more packets that you have to sort through and filter to kind of find that frame, that needle in a haystack as you're trying to troubleshoot what's happening. Right, so that's an example of how we can capture the PCAP file, and then we'd want to open up in Wireshark. And when we open up in Wireshark, we can see some interesting information. So some of the security information that we like to focus on would be the robust, secure network information, right? So I'll let Phil kind of describe what we're looking at inside the packet capture, inside that frame itself, that would bubble up some information that'd be useful to diagnose and look at.
Yeah, so element 48 is the one that's in the beacons. It's in the probes and the associations. It clearly defines what security is being used. And this is one of the biggest myths in security. Like, no one knows what security I'm using. Dude, we all know what security you're using because you advertise it 10 times a second in your beacons. And so by looking at the values in the RSN element, and a quick shout out to the RSN capabilities at the bottom, in the RSN capabilities, that's where you can see if MFP is turned on or not. But in the RSN, it clearly advertises what encryption mechanism you're using and what authentication mechanism you are using. So you can see the numbers there under pairwise cipher suite list. The group cipher is the broadcast cipher, and the pairwise cipher is the individual between the AP and the client cipher mechanism. And if you go to the next slide, please, Troy. Then are we just showing here very quickly the RSN override element? This was to help transition mode between some clients, because can you go back one slide? Sorry, Troy. Some clients would balk at the idea that there are two things in the cipher suite. We've had this problem before in Wi-Fi, but what happened was, nope, there can't be two. I'm unhappy, and they would refuse to connect. So next slide, please, Troy. So the override element was brought in as another option for devices, so that those devices that didn't understand and didn't like the dual connectivity or the dual option would just connect with what they saw as the normal way in the RSN element. Then newer clients would go and look in the override element to see if there are other options. Next slide, please, Troy. I think if we just leave this on for a few seconds, I am aware of the time. I'm happy to stay around a little bit longer if need be. But this is a list of the RSN ciphers, and people can come back and take a screenshot or watch the video. And the next slide, please, Troy. And these are the AKM suites. You can see the standard WPA2, the fast transition, WPA3, and then you can see the new stuff that came out with WPA3 with a 192-bit CNSA suite, suite B. And then you can see the Wi-Fi 7 new functions and features at the bottom to enable and allow MLO to work, for example.
There's a few ways that people refer to a rogue access point. Now, some vendors might stipulate that the way that they determine what a rogue access point is if you have an access point that is connected to your physical network that doesn't belong to your network. So what I mean by that is, let's say you've got 10 Ekahau APs plugged into your network, and then someone comes in and plugs in a different AP that they brought in from home into your physical network. That 11th access point, that could be technically determined as a rogue access point by another vendor. But what we wanted to quickly highlight to you on webinar today is how we as Ekahau, when you are analyzing your data in our applications, how are we determining that? What do we determine as a rogue access point? So let's say, for example, you go and do a survey of your office or your warehouse or any kind of environment. When you do that, you will determine to Ekahau what networks are your networks. So is it, I don't know, let's just call it Ekahau Corporate, Ekahau Guest, Ekahau IoT. These are my networks. So Ekahau now understands that these are your access points. These are the networks that belong to your access points. But when you look at the other access points or rogue APs in Ekahau, you will notice that there are other APs that you can see on a map. And how we're defining that is basically any other network or access point that we hear above a certain threshold, which happens to be neg 55 dBm or stronger, we will place that on the floor plan of your map, and we will determine that to you as another access point, an interfering access point, or as a rogue AP, for you to then go and find, analyze to see if this is a printer, if it's a TV, if it's someone else's access point, for you to go and investigate and analyze to see, is this actually a threat, or is this just someone else has turned on a hotspot, for example. Which is important because if you go to the next slide, please, Troy, you may have heard about what happened to a casino going back a few years ago, where they actually had a breach in their network, and it was through a wireless enabled thermometer on a fish tank. And that was the way that the attackers were able to gain access to the corporate network, and it actually took down the casino, and it wasn't good for the casino. But you might be thinking, well, you know what, Matt, I don't have that many wireless enabled fish tanks in my environment. And yeah, you might be right, but actually you might have more devices that are broadcasting wireless than you expect. I think one of the most common examples that I find every single time I do a wireless survey of an environment is you'll find a printer or a TV that has a physical LAN cable connected to it to the corporate network, but the wireless of that device is actually up and broadcasting. And not only does it cause interference in your network, but also if you've never changed the default password or managing that device is wireless, if someone can hear that and obtain access through the wireless, then they can get into your corporate network. So that's why we as Ekahau, we like to try and make it as easy for you to identify where exactly you have these types of devices, the impact that they're having to the performance of your wireless network, and also the fact that they could be a real weak, easy security vulnerability for a way for someone to get onto your network. So whether you're using our SAB application or analyzing the file in our Ekahau desktop or online application, or even in our optimizer application, we will show you exactly where these potential rogue APs, interfering devices, networks that have weak encryption, any interferers, because we have the spectrum analyzer inside of our device. We will show you that location on the map as well. So you can go and hunt it down, you can check it out, you can verify if it is a threat or if it's not a threat, and then you can remove it. And we even have a dedicated security report that you can run from our optimizer engine and go and find these types of devices and find any networks that could potentially have these weak encryption issues.
So a quick comment on what you just said, Matt. The number of customers I've spoken to, and I'm like, why have you got Wi-Fi turned on the printer? Because you want to be able to print from Wi-Fi. And then I
Yeah.
kind of look at them with a blank look, like, but it's plugged into Ethernet, right? Yeah, but we want to be able to print from Wi-Fi. And it takes a little time and explanation to explain to them that the client connects Wi-Fi to the AP that then sends it to the print server and spooler that sends it. And these, a little light bulb goes off in the head, like, oh, so we don't have to configure Wi-Fi on the printers. And it's also a default setting, Matt, right? Printers,
No.
when you install a printer, it just turns on a Wi-Fi. Some of the best printers I know and have, you've got to go and turn off those Wi-Fi servers. So in summary, then, these are the options that we have available. Okay. General rule, we like things towards the bottom of the list. If you have to create an open network for guests, don't just leave it open. And this is an entirely different webinar we can do, Matt and Troy. Captive portals, right? At least put some kind of captive portal or some kind of open roaming functionality or something. So if you have a guest network, don't just leave it open so anybody can connect with it. At least make it so a user has to click a box that says they accept some terms of use. That's very highly recommended in the industry today. If you are doing open, use enhanced open. I saw a question earlier. Can you do open and enhanced open on the same SSID? Yes, you can. Okay. Again, that is a transition mode that I think actually is one that I can live with, because that's kind of hidden from users. Okay. WEP, really, we should have moved on from WEP and WPA now. If you still have devices that are still using WEP and WPA, please think seriously about upgrading them. What are they doing? They're using the warehouse to check in delivery of oranges. So you can hack into my network and know how many oranges I have. Okay, but it's more than that. It's back to Matt's point with the fish tank, right? If threat actors can find an inlet into the company, they can then leverage and pivot from that inlet to other places. So one unlocked door is all it takes for someone to break into your building. One unlocked SSID is all it takes for them to get in somehow. If you have to have these systems, put them on their own VLAN segment, protect them from other segments with firewalls. So for example, the guest network, lock it down. If you come in as a guest, there is no way you can get onto our internal network. Okay. Look at using as a minimum recommendation WPA2. Best practice, move to WPA3. Okay. If you can. Even WPA2 with protected management frames is better than bland, good old-fashioned WPA2 personal. Now, if you're in an enterprise world, seriously, WPA2 enterprise is still good enough, but turn on protected management frames. That will give you WPA3. Authentication, are you going to use personal? A lot of people, let me say something now, please. Everybody just, let me have your attention for a minute. A lot of people don't realize when you use WPA2 personal, you have one pre-shared key. That means everybody gets the same PMK. That means if I capture your traffic and your four-way handshake, I can decrypt all your traffic as a user in the company with you. So WPA2 personal really isn't very secure. Even if you make it a 22-character passphrase, SAE replaces that, gives us all unique passwords. So WPA2, the four-way handshake, will give you an individual a PTK password, but everybody's using the same PMK. For
Hey
enterprise,
Phil,
go ahead, Matt.
I have a question for you.
Yes.
We travel a lot, and I'm sure a lot of people on the webinar today, they travel or they visit coffee shops, they go to hotels, they go to airports, they go to other places, and sometimes you go to these venues and you don't have good cellular coverage. Like the signal isn't very good, but we need to be connected. We need to be able to work. We need to be able to send emails, social media, etc., etc. And sometimes our only option is to connect to an open guest network that is not using OWE, anything like that. So what is the best way to be mindful or protect ourselves when we go into these public venues and we're connecting to these open networks? Like what should we think about?
VPNs, the end. That's all you need. If you go in, if you connect into an open network, use a VPN. Obviously, it's a stupid idea to telnet to your company's router from the coffee shop. So you shouldn't be using any protocols. I have a blog article I wrote a long time ago, which is only with an S. Only use protocols with an S in them. HTTPS, if you're doing a file transfer, FTPS or SFTP. And the ultimate, of course, security is to use VPNs. Look, there's an S in it, VPNs. So you use protocols with S in them. If you use an SMTP, use one with TLS turned on. If you use an SNMP, use version 3. So there are rules to use protocols. If you have to use something, if you have to do something from a coffee shop or an open network, protect yourself the best you can. Run a VPN so all your traffic runs over a VPN, and then that will keep you safe from prying eyes. And of course, the next thing you do when you leave the coffee shop, or when you come back from that vacation in that lovely hotel in wherever you are, Jamaica, Mexico, San Francisco, wherever, delete the SSID name, right? Delete that SSID name. Because I, as a penetration tester, I did that on purpose just for a bit of fun. Hackers and pen testers, we have tools that will just sit there and wait for your computer to say, are you out there? Lovely hotel. And they'll be like, yeah, I'm here. Would you like to connect to me? And you connect, open, of course, Matt, because it's convenient. And then all your traffic can be captured by that operator. And so cyber hygiene, clean out old SSID names that you don't use frequently, clean them out from your device list. And a shout out to Apple, you didn't used to be able to do that. You can now do that with Apple. You can go in and say, delete, forget this network. And always use a VPN whenever you're at the office, man. I know people who use VPNs when they go to guest networks of corporations, still use a VPN. I don't want them to know what I'm doing on the VPN.
Thank you.
My pleasure. And yeah, so coming back to this, use the tools that are available. There are tools available today that will keep us safe while we browse the internet, while we connect to the network. But they have to be turned on, configured, and used. Captive portals can be a problem in their own right, but it's better than leaving something completely open.
Yes, we just wanted to highlight the next webinar that we're going to be doing in a couple of weeks' time. So if you would like to sign up early so you don't miss it, it's going to be a fantastic webinar. We're going to be having a great guest in Dennis Burrell joining us to talk about Antennas 101, the best way to cover your environment without covering what you don't want to. And you can get yourself signed up if you scan that QR code today and be attending the next webinar. I know we've run over like 10 or 11 minutes already, but I just want to give Dale and Stu the opportunity to come back and then maybe answer one or two of the questions in the Q&A, because we've had a lot of questions today. It's been such great content. I can tell the juices in everyone's minds are flowing around Wi-Fi security.
Well, I also want to say, we appreciate everybody staying, Matt, right? It's such a great topic that people just love to talk about this stuff.
All right.
Absolutely.
So Phil, here's a question for you. And you definitely gave a lot of great advice today. Any final words of encouragement or support for those that are a little nervous for transitioning their networks or moving from WPA2 to WPA3?
So, yeah, try out transition mode, or try and bring up a WPA3 network and leave the WPA2 network there. So it's kind of like the safety wheels on a bicycle, right? Instead of making you worry, because if you think you're going to fall off a bicycle, guess what you're going to do? You're going to fall off a bicycle. So the safety wheels, the stabilizers, are not there because you need them. They're there because you think you need them. And I know dads that have let kids ride bicycles and have taken the stabilizers off and said, look, Junior, you're riding the bike, and the sheer look of joy on the kid's face. It's the same with WPA3, right? Take it for a test ride. Set up an SSID with WPA3 and test it. Once you've thoroughly tested it, let some users connect to it. And so I would highly recommend it. And for example, I turned on WPA3 at home and nobody noticed except for the two people who couldn't connect to it. Yeah, everybody just connected to it. Okay, and so only the ones that have problems will be the ones who complain. Now, obviously, don't go and do this now, please. Test it, check it. Nowadays, my device tells me if I have WPA2 and I'm doing some tests and I converted WPA3, it says, hey, this was WPA2 yesterday, now it's WPA3. And it warns me. It tells me that something's changed. Okay. And I would highly recommend you do it. Go and take it for a test ride and go and try it out.
Thank you, Phil. Stu, did you have a question you wanted to quickly
Yeah,
answer?
I think I wanted to highlight one that was really good from Nick. And this was, and his question is, I know we've covered a lot of the content here today, but just to highlight is, in some companies, decisions are made by committees comprising of people who think that they know Wi-Fi, they think they know better than the Wi-Fi SME, and all the PowerPoint slides in the world are not going to convince them to transition, right, to, mode to, is a bad idea. Like convincing them that running transition is a bad idea. I mean, do you have a more practical way to convince these people that it's a bad idea? I know we covered a bit, but I think this gets onto the topic of, in that security sense, is how do we, us as professionals out there and people, how do we convince our company's leadership to say, hey, we need to make these changes, right? Sometimes it's an outside second opinion, right? It's my kind of thought.
So first of all, if you hire a consultant to say it, management will immediately believe it. That's experience. Secondly, with executive, like get the CEO's permission to do this. But if your CISO, your CTO is fighting it, get the CEO's permission, hire a pen tester to break into your network. And just at the moment when the CTO thinks the world is ending, mentioned to him, oh, no, there's Bob sat over there who's doing this threat attack. Now, that's a little radical too, right? And that
Right, yeah.
But so you may not want to do that. But even hire a pen tester that gives you a report. This is what I found. This is what I could have done. Pen testers are people who will test the security on your network, and they will prove to you how secure it is. And so I want a report saying, here's the passphrase. Oh, who told him the passphrase? No, did he broke the net? She broke the network, right? And then you see the color drain from the CTO's face. And he's like, Phil, let's have a meeting now about how we can upgrade to something more secure. So you've got to gently jolt them and explain to them. And they're not stupid people, Stu. They are very, they just need persuasion. But you have to remember, you were telling them to open their wallet and spend money, right? And so you have to justify it. And honestly, as a security guy, I always see a spike in people that want consultancy after the news media reports that a bank has been hacked or something. Every time a big hacking event is on the television, on the news cycle, I see people, hey, Phil, can you help us with the pen testing, or can we have some security consultancy, please? Because it becomes a real issue in their face, Stu, right? It becomes reality. And that's what you got to do. Again, don't go scaring them, but persuading management. You will always have an ally. You will always have someone who understands. Okay, she might be the CFO, she might be the CEO. It's just the other board members you have to convince. Work with the ally, spend some money creating a report, get a consultant to come in and analyze the data. And then and again, if it's a big name consultant, they will again accept it. But all of that costs money, Stu. And some people would rather spend the money getting a report written on what needs to be done rather than getting what needs to be done fixed, right? But we can be talking millions of dollars upgrading all the barcode scanners in the warehouse. So as an alternative, maybe, do we need the barcode scanner connected to the same VLAN as the staff network? Maybe we give them their own network and we isolate the barcode scanners that are in the warehouse. We don't need to upgrade them all now. We can do it as a phased in the next 5 years. And if you explain that to management, they understand that and they can accept that. But there are steps we need to take now. We have to separate them. Okay, we can't. What is the threat? How do we deal with the threat? A quick example I always explain to people is we don't protect buildings from hurricanes in California, and we do not protect buildings from earthquakes in Florida, because we don't get them very often. But we do protect buildings from hurricane in Florida, and we do protect buildings from earthquakes in California. Does that make sense? So fine.
Oh, yep.
What is
it makes sense here because we're susceptible to earthquakes, right?
What is the threat? How real is the threat? How likely is the threat? What will be the cost if we don't deal with the threat? That's an easy way to explain to management what they need to do. Yeah, so if you're going to spend $1 million to save $500,000, the answer is going to be no, Stu.
Right.
Another perspective is to assume that everybody's listening. Everyone's capturing your traffic today, right? Yes. And you may be encrypting it with WPA2 or WPA3, and it may sound encrypted, but WPA2 is ultimately vulnerable to offline dictionary brute force attacks, right? Given enough time and enough compute power, as Phil explained earlier, you can eventually crack WPA2. Maybe not today, but in 2 years or 3 years. And so it's a question of, if someone captures your secret message, like the recipe for Pepsi Cola, if they capture that today, is that information valuable still in 3 or 5 years? Or do you still need that secret to be a secret in 3 to 5 years? If it's no longer needed to be protected in 3 years, maybe you can live with running WPA2 or transition mode today. But if you still need that information, that data to be secret 3 or 5 years from now, today is the time to transition to WPA3 so that your secrets are still secrets 3 to 5 years, especially as we move and transition into a world of quantum computing, where what may take 6 months or a year to crack WPA2 very quickly will become a matter of minutes. So the faster you can get to WPA3 helps keep your secrets today secrets tomorrow.
I think I can make a prediction here, Troy, that probably within the next year, we're going to have an Ekahau webinar on security, and there's going to be a 5-minute segment on quantum computing. And then within the next 2 years, there's going to be a 20-minute. And within 3 years, we're going to have an Ekahau webinar on quantum computing. It's real, guys and gals, and it's coming. And that's a great point, Troy. The new fighter that the US government is developing, I'm sure they want to keep that a secret for at least 25 years, Troy. Right?
Yeah, agreed.
Yeah, great point. Yeah.
Well, I mean, we've gone over today by 21 minutes, and we still have so many people here on the webinar. That's how engaged everyone is on this content. So we can tell clearly this is a great webinar, and people want to know more about Wi-Fi security. But Phil, I know that you're also teaching a class this week and today, so we should release you because I know you got to get back to those students as well. So, Phil, thank you so much for your time today and putting together all of this awesome content. I would say if you've enjoyed the content today and would like to learn and know more about Wi-Fi and Ekahau and security and training, we do have ECSE courses, and don't forget Phil is a fantastic member of our ECSE instructor team. So yeah, I would highly recommend that. So thank you so much everybody for joining us today on the webinar, and we look forward to seeing you in 2 weeks' time on the next one.